At 32 years old, Mabel embodied the resilience of a woman deeply committed to her family. A devoted mother of two, her days were a steady rhythm of preparing meals, attending school functions, and making ends meet in the quiet rural town she called home. For Mabel, family was everything, a sanctuary she believed unshakable. But her life took an unexpected turn 18 months ago when her husband Troy left for the city to pursue a new job. What was initially framed as an opportunity to secure a brighter future for their family soon became a void that grew wider with each passing day. Troy had called sporadically during the first few months, his tone cheerful but distracted. "Work's just keeping me busy," he would say, a rehearsed explanation that left Mabel feeling both reassured and hollow. The calls became less frequent over time, his voice fading like an echo of a man who once promised to love her through thick and thin. Then came the photos, stark, undeniable evidence of a betrayal she hadn't prepared for. Troy appeared on social media, smiling beside a glamorous woman in pictures that told a story Mabel wasn't part of. When she confronted his family, they dismissed her concerns with flippant excuses. "He's just networking," they insisted, rubbing shoulders with the big wigs to get ahead. Though the words were meant to pacify, they only deepened Mabel's loneliness. Still, she clung to hope, telling herself that Troy's distance was temporary, that he would send for his family once his position was secure. It was the narrative she repeated to herself on sleepless nights, a lifeline to hold on to as she navigated life as a single parent in all but name. Months turned into a year, and then another half, with no sign of Troy coming back. Mabel's world became a balancing act between her children's needs and her own quiet despair. She maintained her home, attended church, and smiled through the whispers of neighbors who speculated on why Troy had stayed away. She remained steadfast, a good wife in the eyes of her community, waiting for the day her husband would walk through the door and reunite their family. That day finally came, but it wasn't the joyous reunion Mabel had envisioned. When Troy arrived, he was almost unrecognizable, leaner, more polished, and radiating an air of detachment that unsettled her. He greeted their children with the warmth of an old acquaintance rather than a father, his interactions perfunctory and strained. With Mabel, he was even colder. The man who once held her hand during thunderstorms now avoided her gaze, his presence casting a shadow over the home she had fought to keep intact. In the days that followed, Troy's behavior grew more estranged. He seemed restless, pacing the small house as though it were a cage. His eyes betrayed a weariness Mabel didn't understand, and his words were clipped, often laced with impatience. Her attempts to bridge the gap between them were met with silence or vague dismissals. She realized with a sinking heart that Troy hadn't come back to reclaim his place in their family. He had come to sever the ties that bound him to it. When Troy finally sat her down, his words were a death knell to their marriage. "I want a divorce," he said, his tone as flat as if he were discussing the weather. Mabel stared at him, her emotions a swirling storm of anger, grief, and relief. She had braced herself for this moment for months, and yet it still felt like a blow she couldn't recover from. But even in her heartbreak, Mabel understood that fighting for Troy's love was futile. He had already chosen to leave long before he uttered those words. Instead of pleading or arguing, Mabel met his gaze with quiet dignity. She listened as he explained his reasons, excuses really, about needing to start fresh and find himself. She didn't tell him about the nights she cried herself to sleep or the countless prayers she sent heavenward, begging for his return. She didn't mention the photos or the whispers from neighbors. She simply nodded and agreed to his request, knowing that clinging to a man who no longer wanted to be there would only prolong the pain. In the days that followed, Mabel began the slow process of rebuilding her life. She knew the road ahead would be challenging, but she also knew she was capable. For too long, she had defined herself through her role as Troy's wife, but now she had the chance to rediscover who she was outside of that identity. With her children by her side and a quiet strength she hadn't realized she possessed, Mabel resolved to move forward, not as a woman waiting for someone to save her, but as a woman determined to save herself. Through heartbreak and resilience, Mabel's story is one of love, loss, and the enduring power of self-recovery. She learned that sometimes the greatest act of love is letting go of the dreams that no longer serve you, of the people who choose to walk away, and of the fear that you can't stand on your own. Mabel's journey is just beginning, and though the path ahead is uncertain, she walks it with the quiet confidence of someone who has faced the worst and come out stronger on the other side. 5 years had passed since Mabel's marriage dissolved, leaving her to raise Jackson, now 12, and Sophie, 10, on her own. What had once seemed like an insurmountable challenge had become her greatest triumph. Despite Troy's absence, Mabel had created a warm, loving home for her children, one filled with laughter, hard work, and unwavering support. They had become a well-rounded family in their own right, proving that love and stability didn't require the traditional mold. Mabel's days were full, but they were hers to shape. Her mornings often started with Jackson and Sophie crowding the kitchen table, their chatter filling the air as they ate breakfast. Jackson had grown into a curious and thoughtful boy, his love of books rivaling Mabel's own passion for crafting. Sophie, meanwhile, was a firecracker of creativity, always eager to help her mother in the workshop. Together, they had built a routine rooted in teamwork and joy, a stark contrast to the uncertainty that had once clouded their lives. The small shed behind Mabel's home had become her sanctuary and the foundation of her success. What began as a hobby during sleepless nights of loneliness had transformed into a thriving business. Mabel's handcrafted woodwork, tables, chairs, shelves, and intricate decor pieces carried a unique charm that set them apart. She poured her soul into every piece, using local timber and designing furniture that blended functionality with artistry. Word of her talent spread quickly in the community. Neighbors who initially pitied her for being left by Troy now admired her for her resilience and skill. Orders began pouring in, and soon, Mabel's creations were not just appreciated locally, but were being shipped to customers across the state. She gave her business a name, Mabel's Hearth and Home, and worked tirelessly to keep up with the growing demand. Her work caught the attention of a local journalist, which led to a feature in Everyday Living magazine. The article celebrated her story, not just for her craftsmanship, but for her journey from heartbreak to empowerment. The glossy photos of her cozy workshop, complete with its worn workbench and racks of tools, seemed to capture the essence of who Mabel had become, a woman who turned her pain into purpose. The feature in Everyday Living magazine marked a turning point for Mabel's business, but it was her children who were her true source of pride. Jackson had inherited her quiet determination and often helped with the simpler tasks in the workshop, sanding wood or organizing supplies. He was a thoughtful boy who adored history, often sharing facts and stories with his mother and sister during dinner. Sophie, on the other hand, had an eye for design. She loved to sketch ideas for furniture, her youthful imagination adding a touch of whimsy to Mabel's otherwise rustic style. Though her contributions were small, Mabel encouraged her daughter's creativity, fostering a sense of confidence that Sophie carried with her in all aspects of her life. Together, they thrived. Weekends were spent hiking the nearby trails or hosting movie nights with popcorn and homemade treats. Mabel made sure her children knew they were loved, and in return, Jackson and Sophie grew into kind, compassionate individuals. They rarely spoke of their father, but when they did, it was with a quiet acceptance that he had chosen a different path. Mabel's life was far from what she had envisioned when she married Troy, but it was a life she was proud of. The pain of his betrayal had long since faded, replaced by gratitude for the lessons it had taught her. She had learned to stand on her own, to build something meaningful from the ground up, and to find joy in the little things. A freshly planed piece of wood, the sound of her children's laughter, the smell of cookies baking in the oven. As she watched Jackson and Sophie grow, Mabel often thought about the future. She dreamed of expanding her workshop, maybe even opening a storefront in town. She also dreamed of traveling someday, taking her children to see the world beyond their small community. For now, though, she was content with the life they had built together. A life of love, creativity, and endless possibilities. Mabel's story was no longer one of abandonment or loss. It was a story of resilience, reinvention, and the quiet power of a woman who refused to let her past define her. She had become more than a wife, or a mother. She had become her own person, and in doing so, she had given her children the greatest gift of all, a role model of strength, kindness, and unwavering hope. The brisk spring morning brought with it a new opportunity for Mabel. She was cleaning up her workshop after finishing a set of dining chairs when she heard a knock at the shed door. Standing there was a tall man in his early 40s, impeccably dressed, but with a warmth in his smile that immediately put her at ease. "Miss Mabel?" he asked, his voice deep and cordial. "Yes, that's me," she replied, wiping her hands on her apron. "How can I help you?" "I'm Wesley," he began. "You recently made a table for my Uncle Ted. It's stunning, truly a work of art. My sister is getting married in a month, and I was hoping you could make something just as special for her. It's a bit of a unique request." Curiosity piqued. Mabel invited him in, motioning to the small sitting area she kept for client consultations. Over tea, Wesley explained his request. "Our mother had this beautiful handcrafted mirror," he began, pulling a worn photograph from his pocket and placing it on the table between them. The picture showed a tall, oval-shaped mirror in a carved wooden frame adorned with intricate floral details. It was given to her by her mother when she got married, and it was meant to be passed down to Kathy, my sister, on her wedding day. But a few years ago, someone broke into our home and stole it. My mother was heartbroken, and Kathy has always dreamed of having it for her wedding. I was wondering if you could recreate it." Mabel studied the photograph, tracing the delicate carvings with her fingers. It was a challenging design, but she could see the sentimental value etched in every curve and detail. Her heart ached at the thought of the family heirloom being stolen, and she felt a deep desire to help restore a piece of their family's history. "It's beautiful," she said finally, looking up at Wesley. "I can't promise it will be an exact replica, but I can recreate the essence of it. I'll need about 4 weeks to complete it." Wesley smiled, relief washing over his face. "Thank you, Miss Mabel. It would mean the world to our family, and especially to Kathy." The next 4 weeks were some of the most meticulous Mabel had ever spent on a project. She selected a rich walnut wood for its durability and warm tones, knowing it would lend itself beautifully to the intricate carvings. Day by day, she worked to recreate the mirror, sketching and refining the floral patterns until they matched the ones in the photograph. Sophie often joined her in the workshop, offering ideas and encouragement. Jackson, ever the steady helper, assisted in sanding and polishing the frame, ensuring every surface was smooth to the touch. Mabel poured her heart into the mirror, imagining the joy it would bring to Kathy on her wedding day. She added her own subtle touches, a tiny carved heart at the base and delicate vines curling along the edges, giving the piece a personal and timeless feel. Exactly 4 weeks later, Wesley returned to the workshop. When Mabel unveiled the finished mirror, his reaction was everything she hoped for. "It's perfect," he said, his voice filled with awe as he ran his fingers over the carvings. "It's like you brought it back to life. My mother will cry when she sees this." Mabel smiled, her heart swelling with pride. "I'm glad it turned out the way you hoped. Tell Kathy I wish her all the happiness in the world." Wesley insisted on paying extra for the work, but Mabel refused. "It's a gift for your family," she said softly. "Let it bring you all closer together." Mabel received an invitation to Kathy's wedding. Though she initially hesitated, feeling out of place, Sophie and Jackson encouraged her to go. "You should see how happy they'll be," Sophie said, beaming with excitement. At the wedding, Mabel watched from the sidelines as Kathy was presented with the mirror during an emotional family toast. Tears filled Kathy's eyes as she embraced Wesley and their mother, the mirror a tangible link to their family's past. Wesley sought Mabel out afterward to thank her again. "You've done more than make a mirror," he told her. "You've helped heal a part of our family. I'll never forget this." As Mabel drove home that evening, her heart felt full. She had started her woodworking business out of necessity, but it had become something much deeper, a way to touch people's lives and create pieces that carried meaning and love. For the first time in years, Mabel allowed herself to think of her own future, knowing it, too, would be as beautifully crafted as the work she left behind. It was a sunny afternoon when Mabel heard the sound of a car pulling into her driveway. She wasn't expecting anyone, so she wiped her hands on her apron and stepped out of her workshop to investigate. There, standing beside a sleek black sedan, was Wesley, holding a leather-bound folder and wearing a grin that hinted at good news. "Wesley," Mabel greeted, surprised but pleased to see him. "What brings you back so soon?" "I hope I'm not intruding," Wesley said, stepping forward, "but I couldn't wait to share this with you. I've got something that might just change your life." Mabel raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Come inside," she said, leading him to the small sitting area she used for client meetings. As they sat down, Wesley opened the folder and handed her a stack of documents. "My new in-laws were absolutely blown away by the mirror you made for Kathy," he began. They couldn't stop talking about it. But here's where it gets interesting. They also saw the Everyday Living magazine article featuring your work. They showed it to a friend of theirs who works with Samson Hotel Corporation, one of the largest luxury hotel chains in the country. Samson is planning to renovate their premium guest rooms, and they want to commission you to create handcrafted wooden desks for the project. Mabel's jaw dropped. "Wait, what?" she stammered, barely able to process the words. Wesley's grin widened. "They want you to design and build 200 desks, each with its own unique design, for their most exclusive rooms. They're looking for something personal, something that will set their brand apart. And they want you to do it. I've drawn up a preliminary contract for you to review." Mabel took the contract with trembling hands, scanning the details. The scope of the project was staggering: 200 desks in 12 months, each crafted to Samson's high standards. The payment terms were generous, but it wasn't just about the money. This was a chance to showcase her artistry on a grand scale, to leave her mark on an industry she'd never dreamed of touching. "I don't know, Wesley," she said, her voice tinged with doubt. "This is huge. I work alone. There's no way I can handle something like this on my own." Wesley anticipated her concern. "That's why Samson has agreed to provide seed money up front. You can use it to hire employees, expand your workshop, whatever you need to make this happen." "They believe in your talent, Mabel. And so do I. You don't have to do this alone." Mabel looked down at her hands, calloused from years of work, and then back at Wesley. The prospect was overwhelming, but she could feel a spark of excitement growing inside her. This was more than a commission. It was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to elevate her craft and secure a future for her family. "I'll need time to think about it," she said finally, her voice steady but uncertain. "Of course," Wesley replied. "But I think you already know the answer. You've been doing the impossible for years, Mabel. This is just the next step." That evening, Mabel sat with Jackson and Sophie to discuss the opportunity. She explained the scope of the project and the changes it would bring: longer hours, more help in the workshop, and the potential for their lives to be very different. "You should do it, Mom," Jackson said, his tone serious but encouraging. "You've always told us to work hard and believe in ourselves. Now it's your turn." "Yeah," Sophie chimed in. "You're amazing, and you can do anything. Plus, think of all the cool people we'll meet if you work with a big hotel." Their enthusiasm brought tears to Mabel's eyes. She knew this decision would be a leap of faith, but she also knew she couldn't let fear hold her back. The next morning she called Wesley. "I'm in," she said, her voice filled with determination. "Let's make it happen." The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. Mabel expanded her workshop, hired a small team of skilled artisans, and began designing prototypes for the desks. Each piece reflected her signature style, rustic yet refined, blending craftsmanship with creativity. Wesley visited frequently to check on her progress, offering support and encouragement every step of the way. Their relationship deepened, built on mutual respect and a shared vision for what Mabel's work could become. As the first desks rolled off the line, Mabel felt a sense of pride she hadn't experienced in years. This wasn't just about fulfilling a contract, it was about creating something lasting, something that carried a piece of her heart into the world. For the first time since Troy had left, Mabel allowed herself to imagine a future filled with possibility. She was no longer just a woman rebuilding her life. She was an artist, a businesswoman, and a force to be reckoned with. And this was only the beginning. As the months passed and the project for Samson Hotel Corporation gained momentum, Wesley became more than just a supportive client. he became a partner in Mabel's growing business. Recognizing her unmatched talent and the potential of her brand, Wesley offered to help her navigate the complex world of corporate deals and financial management. With a degree in finance and years of business experience, he was uniquely equipped to protect Mabel's interests and ensure her business thrived without compromising her vision. At first, Mabel was hesitant to accept his offer. She had spent years building her workshop and reputation on her own, and the idea of giving someone else a stake in her work felt daunting. But Wesley wasn't just anyone. He had proven time and again that he believed in her craft and respected her boundaries. "I don't want to change what makes your work special," he told her one afternoon as they sat in her workshop. "I just want to help you grow it while making sure you're not taken advantage of. There are corporations out there that would love to underpay you and take credit for your designs. I won't let that happen." Mabel finally agreed, and together they formed a partnership. Wesley handled the business side of things, negotiating contracts, managing finances, and ensuring their intellectual property was protected. He also pushed Mabel's brand further, securing features in additional magazines and showcasing her work at high-profile design expos. With Wesley's guidance, Mabel's hearth and home blossomed into a thriving enterprise. Though her workshop expanded, her pieces retained their personal touch, a testament to the values she and Wesley shared. Their partnership was a perfect balance: Mabel's artistry and Wesley's business acumen, a duo unstoppable in their pursuit of excellence. It was a typical day at Mabel's workshop. The air hummed with the sound of sanders and saws as her team worked on a new batch of desks for the Samson Hotel Corporation. Mabel was in her element, discussing design details with Sophie, who had taken a growing interest in the business, when the sound of a car door slamming drew her attention. She turned toward the workshop entrance and froze. Standing there as if no time had passed was Troy. Mabel's heart raced. It had been years since she had seen him, years since he had walked away from her and their children. He looked different, thinner and more disheveled than she remembered, but the confident smirk on his face was the same. He strode toward her as though he belonged there, completely ignoring the shocked expressions of her employees. "Mabel!" Troy called out, his voice filled with forced cheer. "It's been too long." Mabel quickly composed herself. "Troy," she said, her tone icy, "what are you doing here?" Before he could answer, Wesley emerged from the office, carrying a folder of contracts. His brows furrowed as he approached, instinctively positioning himself at Mabel's side. "I'm here to see my wife," Troy said nonchalantly, ignoring Wesley entirely. "I thought it was about time we caught up." Mabel's mind raced. She didn't want Troy here, didn't want to rehash old wounds in front of her employees, or her children, who might wander in at any moment. Without thinking, the words tumbled out of her mouth. "I'm married now, Troy, to Wesley." The lie hung in the air for a moment, and Mabel glanced at Wesley, silently pleading for him to go along with it. To her relief, he recovered quickly, slipping an arm around her waist with a protective familiarity that made the lie almost believable. "That's right," Wesley said, his voice firm. "Mabel and I are married, so whatever you've come for, it's not welcome here." Troy's face twisted in surprise, and for a moment he seemed at a loss for words. Then he laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. "Married, huh? Well, I guess congratulations are in order." Mabel crossed her arms, her posture rigid. "Why are you here, Troy? You left years ago. You have no business showing up now." Troy's smirk faded, replaced by a shadow of desperation. "I just wanted to see how you were doing. Maybe reconnect for the kids." "They're fine," Mabel said curtly. "They don't need you disrupting their lives." Sensing he wasn't welcome, Troy glanced at Wesley, his gaze hardening. "I'll leave, but we'll talk again, Mabel. You can't just erase our history." He turned and walked out, leaving Mabel and Wesley to exchange uneasy looks. As soon as Troy was gone, Wesley turned to Mabel. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine," she said, though her hands were trembling. "I just didn't expect him to show up here." Wesley's expression darkened. "I don't trust him. He didn't come all this way for nothing. I'm going to find out why he's here." Over the next few days, Wesley used his business connections to dig into Troy's recent history. What he uncovered was worse than either of them had anticipated. Troy was bankrupt. His failed attempts at launching a series of get-rich-quick schemes had left him in debt, and he was facing lawsuits from several creditors. Wesley also learned that Troy's glamorous city life had unraveled after the woman he had left Mabel for walked out on him. It didn't take much to piece together Troy's motives. He was looking for a lifeline, and seeing Mabel's success had given him an idea to worm his way back into her life and, by extension, her thriving business. When Wesley shared his findings with Mabel, her initial shock gave way to anger. "Of course he's here because he wants something," she said, pacing the workshop. "That's all he's ever done. Take." "I won't let him hurt you or the kids," Wesley said firmly. "You've worked too hard to rebuild your life for him to come in and ruin it." Mabel nodded, her resolve hardening. "If he comes back, we'll handle it together. But I want to make one thing clear, Wesley. I won't let him manipulate me again." Wesley felt a swell of admiration for her strength. Over the years, he had grown deeply attached to Mabel, not just as a business partner, but as someone who had inspired him with her resilience and kindness. He realized then that his protective instincts came from something more than just friendship. He cared for her deeply, and the thought of Troy trying to take advantage of her filled him with anger. It didn't take long for Troy to show up again. This time, he arrived at Mabel's home in the evening, uninvited and unannounced. Mabel opened the door, flanked by Wesley, who refused to let her face Troy alone. "What do you want, Troy?" she asked, her tone sharp. "I just want to talk," Troy said, his voice oozing false charm. "I've fallen on hard times, Mabel. I thought maybe we could work something out, for the kids." "You mean you want money?" Wesley interjected, his arms crossed. Troy's eyes narrowed. "I don't think this is any of your business." "It is," Wesley shot back, "because Mabel and I are building a life together, and there's no room in it for you." Mabel stepped forward, her voice steady and calm. "Troy, you walked away from this family a long time ago. You don't get to come back now because things didn't work out for you. I'm not the same person I was when you left, and I don't owe you anything." Troy's facade cracked, and for a moment, he looked genuinely desperate. "Mabel, please." "No," she said firmly. "You made your choices, Troy. Now you have to live with them. Leave." Defeated, Troy left without another word. Mabel watched him go, feeling a sense of closure she hadn't realized she needed. After Troy's departure, life returned to normal, or perhaps better than normal. Mabel felt a weight lifted, as though she had finally closed a chapter of her life that had been lingering far too long. Wesley remained by her side, his support unwavering. One evening, as they worked late in the workshop, Wesley turned to her. "You know, pretending to be your husband wasn't exactly hard for me," he said, his tone teasing but sincere. "I'd do it again in a heartbeat." Mabel looked at him, her heart swelling with gratitude and something deeper. "You've done so much for me, Wesley. I don't know how I could ever repay you." "You don't have to," he said softly. "But if there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's that I don't want to just pretend anymore." Mabel smiled, feeling a warmth she hadn't felt in years. For the first time since Troy had left, she allowed herself to hope, for love, for happiness, and for a future that was truly hers. Together, she and Wesley were unstoppable, and she knew that whatever came next, they would face it as partners in every sense of the word. Mabel couldn't deny the growing feelings she had for Wesley. Over the months they had worked together, he had become more than just a business partner and confidant. He had shown her kindness, loyalty, and a protective nature she hadn't experienced in years. For the first time since Troy left, Mabel felt ready to open her heart again. When Wesley asked her out on an official date, she hesitated for a moment but then agreed, her heart pounding with excitement. Their first outing was simple but meaningful. A dinner at a cozy local restaurant where they talked for hours about their dreams, childhood memories, and shared goals. Wesley treated her with respect and tenderness, listening intently and making her laugh in a way she hadn't in years. Their connection deepened with every date. Wesley made an effort to include Jackson and Sophie in their growing relationship, taking them out for ice cream, attending their school events, and encouraging their budding interests. He wasn't just a potential partner for Mabel, he was becoming a part of their family. 6 months into their relationship, Mabel and Wesley had built a life that felt effortless and full of joy. Wesley had become a rock in her life, not just supporting her business, but supporting her as a person. His love and devotion weren't loud or flashy. They were steady, dependable, and deeply genuine. One evening, as they shared a quiet dinner at home after the kids had gone to bed, Mabel found herself overwhelmed with gratitude. She looked at Wesley across the table, his smile warm and his eyes full of affection, and realized she didn't want to spend another day without him by her side. As the night wound down, Mabel cleared her throat, her nerves bubbling to the surface. "Wesley," she began, her voice soft but steady, "can we talk about something?" Wesley set his wineglass down and leaned closer. "Of course, what's on your mind?" Mabel hesitated for a moment, then took his hand in hers. "You've been such an important part of my life these past months. Not just for me, but for Jackson and Sophie too. I've never felt this safe, this loved before. And I've realized that. I don't want this to be temporary. I want us to build a future together." Wesley's eyes widened then softened as her words sank in. "Mabel," he said, his voice filled with emotion, "you've changed my life in ways I never thought possible. I've loved you since the day I saw how much strength and beauty you bring to everything you touch. I want nothing more than to be with you, always." Mabel smiled, her heart racing. "So, Wesley, will you marry me?" Wesley chuckled, his eyes shimmering with tears. "You beat me to it," he said, pulling a small box from his pocket. Opening it, he revealed a simple but elegant ring. "I was planning to ask you tonight." Mabel laughed, tears streaming down her face, and threw her arms around him. "Yes," she whispered. 1,000 times yes." The next morning, Mabel and Wesley shared the news with Jackson and Sophie, who were overjoyed. "Does this mean Wesley is officially our dad now?" Sophie asked, her eyes shining. "It means he's officially part of our family," Mabel said, pulling her children into a hug. With their hearts full and their future bright, Mabel and Wesley began planning their wedding, a celebration not just of their love, but of the family and life they had built together. For Mabel, it was a second chance at happiness, and she knew without a doubt that this time it was forever. The end. Thanks for listening to our tale. Please like and subscribe. It would help our channel. Thank you.